Good afternoon, everybody. I am Kelly Jack, and I'm the Resilience Manager at Croydon Council, which technically means I'm responsible for emergency planning and business continuity. So I don't claim to be a technical person in terms of floods, although this year I've learnt quite a lot about particularly pumps and hoses. I'll talk to you briefly about our experience in Croydon and then what then led on to become the 5-borough groundwater solution cell, which is currently tackling groundwater flood risk in South London. So as I say, I'm the Resilience Manager at Croydon Council, and I was the lead for emergency planning during the flooding in Croydon in February. Some of you may have not known there was flooding in Croydon in February. For London it was quite a big deal, but probably overall in the wider national picture it was maybe not of such a significant scale and definitely didn't make as many headlines. 2 a.m, Sky News, we were on there, but sort of other than that, and I was there watching it in our control room, getting very excited. I then became the chair of the Groundwater Tactical Coordination Group for the 5 South London boroughs, and I'm now the Secretariat for the Solution Cell, which came on from there, and I'll explain sort of bits as we go along. And this is me in January, a week before it all kind of hit the fan, and I'm actually in the Caterham Bourne before it flooded. That smile quickly dissipated at the start of February. So in February, Croydon and Surrey, well actually from before winter, as we all know, we had one of the wettest winters ever. Across Croydon and Surrey, for people who don't know, Croydon is one of the most southern boroughs in London, and we border with Surrey. So if anyone's familiar with Tandridge district, that's kind of where we are in the bigger picture. So all of us had quite significant saturated ground. There was continued rainfall right throughout January and into February. Croydon has 2 local bournes, and like Claire said, they're water courses that aren't always flowing. And in Croydon, the Caterham Bourne in particular, which is where we had most of our problems, generally has heightened flow every 7 years. Every winter it has some flow, but again, it's groundwater fed, and at the moment even it's flowing in some places but not everywhere. So it's a tricky one. And we also have a Merstham Bourne. We also had surface water issues, and we were also experiencing groundwater emergence. And this was at the start of February, and then we also knew there was a whole lot of rain still forecast. So in an emergency planning world, we declared a major incident. And the local authority declared a major incident, which is a bit unusual generally, but under flooding, we have the right to do so. So just a bit of emergency planning jargon for you. The LESLIP, the London Emergency Services Liaison Panel Major Incident Procedure version 8, is a structure and a procedure that all agencies, category 1 and 2 responders, as well as some of the voluntary services, follow in London, and it outlines how we respond as a region and as boroughs to emergency incidents, and more directly major incidents. Under flooding, the local authority can declare a major incident, and that's exactly what I did. Because basically there was, excuse the pun, rising tide nature of the incident. It became very apparent that we were starting to get out of our depth, and there was a sheer number of properties at the risk of disruption. We were looking, when we did our mapping, we had a 3-kilometre site, and there was over sort of 1,000 properties that were potentially going to be at risk if we didn't do something very quickly. We were protecting, and I'll speak about this in a minute, we were protecting primarily the Kenley Water Treatment Works, which is owned by Sutton and East Surrey Water, and I'll explain why we were so concerned and stood this up very quickly. What we did learn is the early identification and sort of standing up of our resources as a multi-agency group worked very much in our favour. And of course, by declaring the major incident, we got lots of things given to us. And the pumps that Claire, sort of the big red ones, we had 4 of them, which was a large majority of, or a large amount of how many there are across the country. So we're very fortunate. So yeah, the Kenley water treatment works. If you're not familiar, there's 3 levels of kind of management in an incident. There's gold, silver and bronze, so the strategic, tactical and operational levels of operation. And in Croydon Council, my chief executive was the gold lead. So our primary aim was to preserve the water treatment works to stop it from ceasing operation. This is a picture of it a little bit in, but you can see this was all groundwater emergence. The big deal for us, and I think to draw your attention to the fact it draws 30 million litres of water out of the ground every day. Now that's not necessarily a big amount for a general waterworks, but for us that was going to become a really big problem if they weren't abstracting that water, and we were potentially going to end up with what was the equivalent to an Olympic-sized swimming pool being emptied from this site as such, emerging every 2 hours. That was the analogy that was given, and basically moving its way upwards towards the Thames. So that's why we were a bit scared that a number of properties were going to be at risk. As I said, nearly 5, we had kind of different prongs going on, because there was the worry about the actual impact on properties in terms of them actually being impacted by flood water, but at the same time the other arm was that actually if the waterworks shut down, there'd also be another set of properties in another area who weren't going to be impacted by flood water but would actually have no fresh water. So we're also kind of trying to manage how we're going to get bowsers and bottled water up quite a big hill. So in Croydon generally we had quite a number of differing issues in the floods, and then this was unprecedented for Croydon and actually for anywhere in London. And we had a mix of surface water, groundwater and also sewage, which caused its own issues, because I think other speakers have said it's quite difficult to then decide the source or blame any one thing. This is one of our residents who that's all groundwater in his rear garden, and he lost a whole pond of carp, of koi carp. And I think he's still trying to get the money back from his insurers, because actually no one knows where the fish actually went. So again, we've brought the topic up about sandbags. We had, because of the differing types, we found sandbags very effective in some places, but we know that groundwater, it doesn't really help. And sometimes that was difficult to communicate. And I think talking about where sometimes you're just giving a sandbag to make the resident feel a bit better because they feel like you're doing something. We had a control centre open 24 hours a day for nearly 4 weeks, and we were coordinating all the multi-agency arrangements, the on-scene operations, dealing with the evacuees, and also, of course, the multi-agency communications to residents. All this time, groundwater continued to still be quite a concern. This is this is a South London water map around the boreholes that we've been dealing with, and if you can see, green is the normal thing here, and this is where our boreholes were reading up in February. So as you can see, you can see why we were in trouble, and that's what was happening sort of on the Surrey side, and the water current sort of moves through into Croydon and into other boroughs. It's quite scary. I can tell you now it's kind of levelled off a bit and it's back to normal, but we're actually now starting to see it go up a little bit. That's provided and done by the Environment Agency, who became our best friends. So just some examples of what we were dealing with, what Bromley was dealing with. So Bromley Council, who are if you're looking at a map, it's to the right of Croydon. Some of their groundwater flooding issues they had in railway stations, that's New Addington playing fields, and then I think it's the second lot of yellow ducks today. People got a bit creative in Bromley. But also there is the human side to it. So these are 2 sets of properties that were that were impacted in Bromley, and the water was there for some time. And it's a bit, although Bromley experienced groundwater flooding while Croydon was still experiencing an incident, they were slightly delayed because of how the groundwater moves through South London. So there is a natural trend for groundwater to move from south to north. I still can't work out how water moves north. I can't, doesn't work for me. But we came together, there's 5 boroughs, so here's Croydon, Sutton, Bromley, Bexley and Greenwich hits the Thames, if you're not familiar with London. And we realised that as the groundwater moved, Croydon was going to, what had happened in Croydon was then appearing in Bromley, and there was quite a concern of then what was happening in Bexley and through to Greenwich as the water made its way through the ground. So in March, London, we as a London group pulled together a strategic and tactical working group to start supporting, for the 5 boroughs to start working together. The 5 boroughs were joined by quite a large multi-agency contingent, so that was everything from Thames Water to the utilities companies and of course Environment Agency and some of the other sort of business panel partners and things like that. It was quite a big deal. We also included Surrey because Surrey had become good friends of ours throughout the flooding, and there was a lot of joint working that we needed to do because a lot of what Surrey was doing was impacting on what was then going to happen in Croydon and beyond. So the aim of the 5 borough partnership was to ensure coordination between South London local authorities, to ensure we are fully prepared to mitigate the risk of groundwater flooding and able to establish short-term resilience and identify solutions for medium to longer-term resilience. So those strategic and tactical coordinating groups, as I said, it was a large multi-agency group, and we pulled together, or what was pulled together was a general business/action plan with working together how we were going to sort of tackle this. Only what we were all dealing with at the time, but how we were going to sort of foresee things were happening. And at this point, Croydon, Bromley and a little bit of Bexley were experiencing significant groundwater issues, but there was also still this concern that Sutton and Greenwich were still potentially going to get some issues in a few weeks' time. There was a collaborative working and escalation protocol pulled together. And this is interesting from a London perspective because generally as London, emergency planning is done as a 33 borough collective, and there's special arrangements in place, which we were kind of not usurping, we were kind of trying to fit this middle layer in, which would suggest instead of just a borough working to London, there was this 5 borough group. The protocol set out how we were to work together, and also an escalation protocol, which outlined basically if one of us was in trouble, we came to the other boroughs first, and the mutual aid process around sharing resources such as pumps, etc., particularly if it got to the point where Croydon had kind of finished their incident and had resources, and Greenwich or Bexley were still experiencing theirs, we'd make sure we all kind of worked together in that sense. We had weekly CRIPs. Now, a CRIP is a commonly recognised information picture, and so that just detailed current statuses in borough, gave a groundwater assessment, the Environment Agency and the Met Office were providing weather information and borehole data, but also we were being very clear amongst each other every week as to what assets we had. So there was the demountable barriers, which Croydon had been using, and then they were made available, pumps and hoses, and of course sandbags and available sand. In April, those working groups kind of slowed down, and what formed was known as the solution cell. And the solution cell term came from the actual Croydon flooding, where a group of kind of technical experts were having a separate working group to the gold and silver meetings and working out exactly how we're going to pump water where how to store it, where to hold it, and all things like that. So the solution cell term got bandied around, and everyone quite liked that, so that's what we called ourselves. And so eventually that working group just was established, and in May the strategic group formally stood down and we became a working group as part of our business as usual. Just Bromley, I don't know if you can see that because of the white writing, excuse me, that's still Bromley in June this year, and then still dealing with repairs and all sorts. That's a drainer or dryer, I think. So, excuse the number of words on there. So just to kind of give you a basic overview of what the Groundwater Solution Cell is doing, again, it's a multi-agency group represented by the 5 boroughs. It's chaired by one of the borough commanders of the London Fire Brigade. We also have Surrey County Council and the Environment Agency and Thames Water, with the plan to bring in any other technical experts as we need. We also have the GLA represented at times or feeding in as well. So what we've done, there's some groundwater flood maps that the Environment Agency have helped develop. We've considered the critical infrastructure that are in these areas, but also I'll show you a map in a minute, but we also know that where there's mapping, it doesn't always mean that's actually where the water is presented itself. So again, lots of local knowledge has been very helpful in this. Together ahead of this winter, we've decided to pull together just a basic practitioner handbook, which is a bit like the weekly CRIP, where we have a general overview about the borough and their key risk areas, but also have identified the available resources, the escalation protocol, and actually where we would get some pumps from should we need them. And also remembering if you need pumps, you need hose. We had a really big problem with that. And like previous, I think Peter was saying, people have pumps, but they don't have the discharge hoses. And if you don't have the right size for that pump, it can get very problematic very quickly. There's also a groundwater kind of newsletter that the Environment Agency have been working on, and I think that's for the whole country, but it's separated into the various areas. And that's just a monthly report around the groundwater levels, and that's on the gov.uk website, and they've just started releasing those. It gives you a general overview, provides the kind of graphs I showed you earlier, and gives us an indication as to what the boreholes are doing across the region. We have also been aligning our groundwater preparedness. So what became very clear to me as an emergency planner, our multi-agency flood plan had no mention of anything groundwater related, and really not even anything surface water related. We very much focused on the flood warnings the Environment Agency gave us, and it was very much fluvially based. So as a group of London boroughs, but also on the London scale as a whole, multi-agency flood plans should be including, or will be including, an element around groundwater flood risk, and also, as Claire mentioned, the flood risk management strategies are all being reviewed to make sure that groundwater information is actually quite distinct from just surface water and being included quite generically. What we also learned, as you imagine, communications was quite a massive part of the incident response right across the board, and making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page, and what Croydon had learned in their major incident was shared with particularly the other 5 boroughs who were potentially facing the same issue. So our communication lead met with the 5 boroughs, and including Surrey, and just kind of walked through the strategies and the tools and things that they had used that we found productive and helpful and effective. I mean, we opened a flood advice centre at one point, maybe a bit late, because we only sort of had 10 people, I think, over 2 weeks attend. But again, it's understanding who you're dealing with and knowing what your residents actually want and what kind of help and advice they want. I didn't think we worked out they didn't really want to come and just talk to someone about what has happened. They wanted something a bit more proactive, or they're wanting to know actually how are you going to get the water out of my house. Overall, and the whole kind of point of working as a 5-borough group is obviously to improve joint working and information sharing. And I will admit, although Surrey County Council aren't actually one of the 5 boroughs, our sort of County London relationship has very much improved because of the experiences we've had throughout February, as well as working together on the 5-borough solution cell. So just quickly a little bit about the handbook. This is one of the maps that the Environment Agency had produced for us. So it's a bit blue. This is Bexley, who sit to the right of Bromley, right and a bit north of Bromley. And there's various bits of mapping here from what the Environment Agency had, so things like schools and hospitals. What became very clear very quickly is we didn't have comprehensive data sets. None of us did. What the local authority had was different to the Environment Agency, and then also we were trying to kind of pull everything together and make some sense of all of this. What you can see, the red lines, that's actually the spring lines, with the blue and then the light blue indicating where there's potentially groundwater flooding. We had 5 maps that that had this kind of concept on them for each of the boroughs, and we found things like in Bexley there was lots of incidents in this bit. So actually the local knowledge thing makes a real difference. So majority, yes, we can work to the spring lines, but you'll never know. And it's the same with Croydon. Our map for Croydon is all blue in the south, but we had a number of incidents in the north where there doesn't seem to be any suggestion from a modelling perspective that there'd be any issue there. So helpful, but to an extent, and we know there's a lot more that can be done. So as I mentioned, in the Borough Handbook we have various information around the flood defence assets, so that's to say anything from the temporary barriers through to pumps and hoses, but it also details things like temporary storage areas. Luckily in Surrey and somewhat in Croydon, definitely in Bromley, there's lots of open space. So there's been lots of digging, particularly in Surrey, to make big water storage areas. And if you go onto Surrey County Council's website, they have some quite amazing pictures of diggers in big farmland holes and stuff where we now can use that to store water to slow it down, pumping it through the boroughs into Croydon. So the future for us in the 5-borough solution cell, it is a little bit uncertain, and I think it's made me feel a bit better listening to everyone today, because it seems like there is some uncertainty, and I feel a bit better that it's not just me feeling a bit dumb, and that it is something that we are all starting to look at a bit more closely, and we know that there hasn't necessarily been the research or the funding or whatever it is, the input that maybe there should have been, the acknowledgement that there should have been before now. So the solution cell itself, we continuing to meet monthly, and every month we're getting those updates with each other around what's happening within the boroughs, particularly helpful from the Environment Agency. So there's things like also the monitoring of the boreholes that's being improved. Thames Water have just last week said that they've got some depth monitors that they're willing to put into some of the areas, particularly in Croydon. So there's lots of sort of those small but really critical things that are happening between the agencies. So we are prepared for escalation if required, which goes back to the earlier in the year, the protocol that we had, the information that's now in the handbook, and And then also we know we're supported on a London scale as well, because there's that backing up of the LESLEP, you can remember that acronym, buy you a drink, the LESLEP manual. And as mentioned earlier, the groundwater solutions and local flood risk assessments, that's all being. And there's lots of bids that have gone into the EA and DEFRA and all sorts for flood risk management solutions and mitigation projects, which, to be honest, are very much sort of still fluvially based, but now there's more conscious bidding, I think, and conscious consideration for groundwater solutions. And again, I think it was what Claire said around implementing solutions where that's just where it happened now, but that might not be where it happens. And if we did that back in 2007 when this area flooded before, that was a kilometre up the road where they were kind of waist deep in water. And there's all, and if we were to go where, then we would have not supported what happened in February and vice versa. So it's a tricky beast. And of course we're working with the Environment Agency. They have been very big major partners in all of this, and we were very, very grateful for their support, particularly during February, and their ongoing support. And what's great is, I think, although there's been maybe some absent budgets before now, and they were all going to get chopped, all the flood teams were going to be losing their jobs. February happened and they're all still with us, and there's new teams looking at groundwater flood risk, which is great. The GLA and other London agencies are very interested in what's been going on, and there's a number of groundwater flood risk studies that are happening, which people are keen to know how we've been working together, but also how we can start managing that. So I think the future for groundwater is going to be very interesting, although a little uncertain. But that's really it for me around what we've been doing in Croydon and how we got on. But I'd just like to leave you with this picture, because I've decided that there is, amongst the kind of horribleness, there can be some beauty in groundwater. And this is not a lake, this is some rugby fields in Bromley. But with a nice sunset, glass of wine, although you're in your high vis, you could probably still enjoy it, even if you're sort of knee deep in water. So thank you, everybody.